Let me ask you something that sounds almost too simple to bother with. What does your body actually know about your life? Not what you know, what your body knows. You might think the answer is obvious. Your body knows what you tell it, more or less, through your mood. You're happy, your body relaxes. You're stressed, your body tenses up. Feeling and biology marching in step together, but that's not quite how it works. And once you see the gap between the two, you can't unsee it. Here's a better way to picture it. Your body isn't reading your diary. It's not interested in your opinions about your own life. It's running something much older and much dumber, a kind of constant background survey of your environment. How many people did I interact with today? Was there another person nearby while I slept? Did anyone touch my shoulder, sit across from me, share a meal with me? It's not measuring whether you enjoyed those things. It's just counting whether they happened. This survey runs whether you're paying attention to it or not, and it feeds directly into your stress hormones, cortisol in particular, and into markers of inflammation circulating in your blood. These systems evolved for one purpose: to gauge, roughly, am I safe or am I exposed? And for almost the entire span of human existence, exposed meant alone. Not lonely, alone, without a group, without backup. So here's the strange and important part. Your body doesn't have a setting for alone, but perfectly content. It didn't evolve one, because for most of human history, that combination barely existed. Being physically alone and being at risk were basically the same fact. Your nervous system still runs that old equation, quietly, in the background, no matter how much your conscious mind has updated its opinion. This is why two people can live in the exact same amount of solitude and report completely different feelings, one lonely and miserable, one content and at peace, while their bodies show a surprisingly similar physiological signature: slightly elevated stress hormones, slightly higher inflammatory markers, not dramatic, not something you'd feel on any given Tuesday, but present and cumulative, like interest quietly compounding on a loan you didn't know you'd taken out. Think of it like a smoke detector that can't tell the difference between a real fire and burnt toast. It doesn't have the wiring to make that distinction. It just detects smoke, and it sounds the same alarm either way. Your stress system is a lot like that smoke detector when it comes to solitude. It can't fully tell the difference between I chose this quiet life and I love it, and I am cut off and unsafe. Both register, at some low hum, as less coverage than before. Now, this doesn't mean solitude is dangerous, or that everyone living alone is secretly suffering. That's not the point at all. The point is narrower and, honestly, more useful. Your subjective sense of loneliness is not a reliable readout of what's happening physiologically. You can be genuinely, sincerely fine and still be running slightly hotter, slightly more inflamed, slightly less protected, simply because the old counting system in your body hasn't caught up with your modern, considered adult decision to live alone and like it. So the real takeaway isn't living alone is bad. It's this: don't use your feelings as the only instrument on the dashboard. Feeling fine is real information, but it's not the whole picture, and for this one particular system, it might not even be the most important piece. The body is still counting something your mind stopped counting a long time ago. And the smartest move isn't to override that old system with willpower or good cheer, it's to work with it. Build in more contact, more presence, more of the raw material that system was designed to look for, not because you're lonely, but because your body is still, quietly, checking the mailbox. Here's a question worth sitting with for a second. How much of your daily movement actually comes from exercise? Most people, if they're honest, will say, not much. A walk, maybe. A class, if they're disciplined. But that's not where most of your movement comes from. It comes from something much less glamorous. It comes from just living around other people. Let's take it apart, because this is one of those things that's invisible precisely because it's so ordinary. Picture a house with two people in it. Someone's in the kitchen, someone's in the living room. One of them calls out, "Hey, can you grab the mail?" That's a walk to the door and back. One of them starts cooking, and the other wanders in just to see what's happening, maybe leans on the counter, maybe helps chop something. That's standing, reaching, small motions repeated a dozen times. The phone rings for one of them, and the other gets up to bring it over. Someone comes home with groceries, and the other one goes out to help carry bags. None of this counts as exercise. Nobody would log it in a fitness app. But it's motion, real, physical, muscle-engaging motion, happening dozens of times a day, and almost none of it is intentional. It's a side effect of proximity. It's what happens automatically when a body has to respond to another body nearby. Now take the second person out of the house. The mail still needs to get picked up, but nobody's calling you to do it, so you do it once, on your schedule. Maybe once a day instead of 3 times. Nobody wanders into the kitchen to see what smells good, because there's no one to smell it but you. No one calls the phone across the house for a reason that gets you up out of the chair. The bags of groceries get carried in by exactly one set of hands at exactly one pace, with nobody there to say, "Let me get that." Here's the part that matters. None of these movements were ever exercise. They were never meant to build strength or improve your cardiovascular health, but they added up to something. And when the second person disappears, that something doesn't get replaced, it just doesn't happen anymore. There's no dramatic moment where you decide to move less. There's just less reason to. Think of it like a plant that's been getting watered by rain for years without anyone noticing it was rain and not a sprinkler. Take the rain away, and the plant doesn't announce that it's thirsty right away. It just slowly, quietly uses up what it had stored. By the time it looks different, a lot of time has already passed. That's what happens to muscle and mobility when this background movement disappears. It's not sudden. There's no single day where your body says, "I've now lost the movement I used to get from living with someone." It's a slow leak, a little less walking this month than last, a little more sitting, a little more staying in one room because there's no reason to leave it. And because it happens gradually, it doesn't register as a change worth worrying about. It just feels like getting older, like slowing down is simply what happens. But it isn't only that. Some meaningful fraction of that slowing down isn't aging in the biological sense at all. It's the disappearance of a companion's gravitational pull. You used to orbit another person's needs and habits all day without thinking about it, and that orbit kept you moving. Take away the other body in the house, and you take away the orbit. So the practical lesson isn't go to the gym more, although that helps. It's this: notice that your old movement wasn't a choice you were making. It was a byproduct of another person's presence. If that presence is gone, the movement has to become a choice now, on purpose, because it's not going to sneak back in on its own. Nothing is going to call you from across the house anymore. You have to call yourself. Here's a question that sounds almost silly until you actually think it through. Why do we cook full meals in the first place? Part of it is hunger, obviously, but a surprising amount of it is audience. We cook real meals because someone else is going to sit down and eat them with us. Take away the audience, and something strange happens to the whole activity, even though the hunger is exactly the same. Let's walk through it slowly, because this is one of those changes that never announces itself. Nobody wakes up one day and decides, "I'm going to eat worse now." It happens in 100 tiny decisions, each one so small it barely registers as a decision at all. Picture cooking dinner for 2. You make a real dish, say chicken, a vegetable, a starch. It's worth the effort because there are 2 plates to fill, 2 people to feed, maybe a bit of conversation while it's happening. The leftover ingredients get used up because there's enough demand to justify buying them in the first place. Now picture cooking that same meal for 1. Suddenly, the math changes. Do you really want to dirty 3 pots for a single plate? Is it worth buying a bunch of fresh herbs that'll wilt in the fridge before you use them again? The vegetables that used to get finished in 2 days now sit for a week, going soft, and eventually get thrown out. So next time, you just don't buy them. Round by round, the effort to reward ratio of cooking a full meal tips further and further toward not worth it. And the mind, being efficient, responds exactly the way you'd expect. It looks for a shortcut. The shortcut usually isn't dramatic. It's toast instead of a real breakfast. It's a sandwich standing at the counter instead of a seated dinner. It's cereal 3 nights in a row, because cereal doesn't ask anything of you. No chopping, no pans, no decision-making, no audience to perform a proper meal for. And here's the piece that matters most. Protein is usually the first casualty. Protein is the most work-intensive part of a meal to prepare for just one person. A chicken breast doesn't shrink politely to a single serving size. You either cook the whole thing and eat leftovers for days, or you skip it and reach for something easier. So little by little, the protein disappears from the plate first, replaced by things that are simpler: bread, pasta, something out of a box. This matters more after 60 than it would have at 30 for a very specific reason. Muscle doesn't maintain itself for free. It needs a steady, ongoing supply of protein just to keep from slowly eroding, a process the body is already inclined toward as it ages. So the exact nutrient your muscles need more of, right when they need it more, is the exact nutrient that quietly vanishes first when you're cooking for one. It's almost the worst possible timing, and it happens by drift, not by decision. Here's a useful way to picture it. Think of your eating habits like a garden that used to be tended by two gardeners. When one gardener leaves, the garden doesn't die overnight. It just gets a little less looked after. A section here goes unweeded. A corner there stops getting watered on schedule. None of it looks dramatic in the moment. But a year later, you step back and the whole garden looks different, and you can't point to the single day it happened. So the fix isn't complicated, even if it takes real intention. It's treating a meal for one as if it were worth exactly as much effort as a meal for two. Because your body doesn't know or care how many people are at the table. It's keeping protein on the plate on purpose, since nothing else is going to put it there for you now. It's buying food in quantities built for one, rather than letting waste talk you out of buying good food at all. Because the real danger was never a single bad meal. It's the slow, invisible math of cooking for one, where every tiny shortcut feels reasonable, and only the sum of all of them, months later, tells the truth. Here's a question worth asking. What actually decides when you fall asleep and when you wake up? Most people would say the clock does, or their own body, their own internal rhythm. And that's partly true. You do have an internal clock, running on its own, roughly a 24-hour cycle. But here's the part that surprises people. That internal clock is not as independent as it feels. It's constantly being nudged, corrected, and kept in line by outside cues. And one of the strongest cues for most of adult life is another person. Think about what living with someone actually does to your schedule without either of you ever discussing it. They get up at a certain time, and the sound of them moving around pulls you a little closer to waking, even if you don't fully wake up. Dinner happens at a set hour because two schedules have to overlap somewhere in the middle. The lights go off at a certain point because someone else is ready for bed, and it's easier to go along with it than to sit alone in a lit room. None of this feels like discipline. It doesn't feel like a system. It feels like just living with someone. But underneath, it's doing something important. It's holding your internal clock to a consistent shape, the same way a trellis holds a vine to a certain form without the vine ever noticing it's being guided. Now take the other person out of the house. There's no one whose movement wakes you a little earlier than you would have woken on your own. There's no dinner hour to build the evening around, so dinner drifts later or disappears into something eaten whenever. There's no one else ready for bed, so the light stays on, the television stays on, and bedtime creeps 15 minutes later this week, half an hour later next month. Nothing forces it back into place, because the thing that used to force it back into place is gone. This is what I mean by sleep losing its anchor. An anchor doesn't do anything dramatic. It doesn't pull the boat anywhere. It just stops the boat from drifting. And when you remove it, the boat doesn't crash into anything right away. It just slowly moves, inch by inch, until one day it's noticeably far from where it started, and nobody can point to the exact moment it happened. Here's why this matters more than it sounds like it should. Sleep isn't just rest. It's the process underneath almost everything else on this list. Memory consolidates during sleep. Blood sugar regulation depends on consistent sleep. Immune function depends on it. Even mood, the very feeling of being fine, which we talked about earlier, is deeply dependent on sleep being regular, not just sufficient. You can technically get 8 hours a night and still suffer if those 8 hours land at a different time every single day. The body doesn't just want enough sleep, it wants predictable sleep, and predictability was never something you built on your own. It was something built jointly by two schedules leaning on each other. So when the anchor disappears, what you often get isn't insomnia exactly. It's something quieter and easier to miss. Drift. Going to bed a little later each week, waking up a little later or a little more erratically. Naps creeping into the afternoon to cover the gap, which only makes the nighttime schedule drift further. None of it feels like a crisis in the moment. It just feels like flexibility, the freedom of not having anyone else's schedule to answer to. But that same flexibility, left unchecked, slowly erodes the very regularity your body depends on. The lesson here isn't that you need another person in the house to sleep well. Plenty of people living alone sleep beautifully. The lesson is narrower. If you live alone, the structure that used to arrive automatically now has to be built on purpose. A fixed wake time, a fixed wind down. Something has to do the job the other person used to do without either of you realizing it was a job at all. Let me ask you something odd. Who is the worst person to notice that something's wrong with you? You'd think the answer would be no one. I know my own body better than anyone, but that's actually not quite true, and understanding why gets at something important. Here's the thing about being inside a slow change. You adapt to it in real time, which means you often can't see it happening. If you start limping slightly, you don't experience it as "I now have a limp." You experience it as "the stairs feel a little annoying lately." If you're a little more forgetful than you used to be, you don't feel a deficit. You just feel like you've been busy or tired or like the name was on the tip of your tongue. The mind is remarkably good at smoothing over its own decline, filling in gaps, explaining away small changes with small, reasonable-sounding stories. It has to be, otherwise you'd be alarmed by every minor fluctuation in how you feel all day, every day. This is exactly why other people are so useful. Not because they're smarter than you, but because they're outside the slow change. They see you in snapshots, not in the continuous adapting stream you experience yourself. Someone who sees you every day for years might say, out of nowhere, "You're limping. When did that start?" And you genuinely won't know, because you weren't measuring it. You were living it. Think of it like trying to notice your own hair growing. You can't. You look in the mirror every day, and every day it looks the same as yesterday, because the change between any 2 days is too small to see. But someone who hasn't seen you in 6 months will notice immediately. Same principle, except instead of hair, it's a limp, a bit of confusion, an unintentional 10 pounds lost, a smell in the house that shouldn't be there, a stack of unopened mail. Small deviations that are invisible from inside a single, continuous life, but obvious from outside it. Now take away the person who used to be outside your life, a spouse, a roommate, someone who saw you daily, and suddenly there's no one positioned to say, "Hey, that's new, should you get that checked?" There's no one to notice you've been eating less, no one to notice you're repeating the same story you told yesterday, no one to say, "You don't seem like yourself." The absence of another person doesn't cause any of these problems. Let's be clear about that. That's an important distinction. But it removes the early warning system that used to catch them before they became large. This is what makes small things dangerous in a way they wouldn't otherwise be, not the things themselves, but the delay before anyone, including you, realizes they're happening. A minor infection that would have been caught in week 1 gets caught in week 3. A pattern of confusion that a spouse would have mentioned after a few days goes unmentioned for months because you're the only witness, and you're the least reliable witness of your own gradual change, for the same reason you can't watch your own hair grow. So what's the actual fix here? It's not moving in with someone, and it's not panic. It's rebuilding the outside perspective on purpose, since it no longer arrives automatically. A weekly call with someone who knows you well enough to notice if your voice sounds different. A regular visit from a friend or family member who sees you often enough that small changes stand out against the baseline. Even something as simple as a standing coffee date does part of the job that a spouse or roommate used to do without anyone assigning it as a task. Because the real risk was never being alone in the house. It was being alone with the only witness to your own decline. And that witness, however well-intentioned, is exactly the one person too close to the picture to see it changing.